Hello, 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 everyone. My name is Alana. Welcome back to the Digital Green Book Podcast. And I have with me today the lovely Sherrell Dorsey. As you know, on Digital Green Book, I love to chat with amazing people inside of the community. I think we have so many champions just out here getting the work done. Uh, Anyone who's in and around tech, VCs, angels, just people out here doing the legwork to really elevate our community. So I'm so honored to have you here today, Sherelle, because I think you're so phenomenal and you do so many positive things for us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alana. Thank you for having me on the Digital Green Book. I'm really excited for the conversation today. As you know, but maybe your audience doesn't know, I'm the founder of The Plug. We covered Black innovation and insights from a data-driven perspective. I recently decided to step away from The Plug and start working on some things in the background. But the core of the work that I've done in almost the last decade has really been about bringing attention and storylines to what's happening in Black innovation across the ecosystem and really creating quantitative and deep research. And I still believe in that mission of, data-driven insights that are helping us to understand and to see that genius comes from everywhere and from every place and from anybody. And particularly centering, Black innovators in conversations and embedding them into the narrative that we just traditionally haven't done.
You know what the funny thing is? I've been having so many D&I conversations lately unintentionally, and I find that either people are very receptive to it because they do understand the need for diversity, whether that's all the way back from product creation, like, oh, maybe if I make a pulse oximeter, but I didn't have any people in the room that were melanated, I don't understand that the pulse oximeter can't read. And it seems like we're not doing as well in hospital settings, all the way down to, oh, this wasn't thoughtfully designed for a handy capable person, and now we have to rework our entire model of a building. So some people really do get D&I, but then there's the more subtle, innocuous ways that it creeps in, all the way from like VC funding, job opportunities and hiring, relationships, friendships.
Yeah.
What would you say made you go on the journey that you're on now, where it seems very D&I focused?
Yeah, I think that we've been able to couch DE&I to address like everything, and I think that it's not necessarily like this kind of one label that can really be put around what does inclusion actually look like, what does it mean? And I think for me, it's really about how do we define intellectual curiosity and how we build? How do we create a sense of literacy around different cultures, different communities, different issues or experiences that help us to think about and expand our definition of how technology is for the people? And I think that as I've gone through the journey of learning how people build and why people build, and even confront some of my own biases, I also host like the TED Tech podcast. So the infamous like TED Talks, everyone wants to do a TED Talk, that whole like welcome to my TED Talk sort of mantra. I host that podcast. And one of the talks I had a chance to kind of review and do an analysis on, and I do apologize because the speaker's name is escaping me, but essentially he brought up the statistic that over 90% of all websites are non-ADA compliant. And we don't necessarily build things with other people in mind. And when I was reviewing that talk and doing a lot of writing and working with my producers on how we speak about this, and then what are some of the things that we can provide to our listeners around how do we make things much more accessible on the internet, it made me really think about how we can get caught in this loop of DE&I just being this like kumbaya, everybody at the table, versus how do we ensure that folks who need access get access and have a sense of safe space when they are in spaces that are typically not built for them. And what is our duty to ask the big tough questions? Now, we can't always solve for everyone at first, right? And I think we need to understand that there's so many things that like we're creating in the world that are first. And, the process of iteration, when we build something, when we launch something, it's going to be sloppy and messy, and there's going to have lots of holes in them. And that's where the intellectual curiosity around like diversity, around who's not at the table, what's not represented in the data, who's not in the room, who have we not thought about. That's where you really get into the meat and the potatoes of the opportunity, right? To expand the work and to expand the problem solving and to, to really stretch your brain around, well, how can we keep refining this so that it does work for more people or more systems or more opportunities. And so that's kind of the way that I've been approaching it. I'm not a D&I practitioner by training, but I think so much about, wow, like I would have never thought about that because that's not been my experience. I watch a lot of shows. Like I know like the tech world's like anti-TV, like grind until you die. But like I love TV. I love watching really good scripted shows. And I'm watching this show, The Company You Keep. And, just the representation of the niece being deaf and everyone in her life knowing how to sign, just knowing how to say like hello, and the effort people make to learn how to communicate with her, and to see that on television, it makes you think, wow, in what ways, if I decide to host a conference, am I ensuring that we have an interpreter? you know am I ensuring that for myself, I'm even trying to learn a few things around ASL, so that if I do encounter someone who, is hard of hearing or needs additional assistance, I can be somewhat fluent in communication or have access to people who can support. And so anyway, I just think it gives us this opportunity for intellectual curiosity. It allows us to do more research. It allows us to better understand, to speak to people about their experiences. And I think ultimately that makes us not just better technologists and practitioners, but it also makes us better humans overall.
That's a good point, Lisa. You say when you in interviews or meetings that you're having with people, you ask the question, what should I be asking that I haven't asked yet? And that was super thoughtful when you just said that, Sherrell, because it's like, even for myself, I find myself on a D&I journey now, even though I hesitate with labels because I don't like to be boxed in or pigeonholed to just like a few metrics and outcomes, especially not how traditionally D&I has been tackled in any of these ecosystems, because it does feel very much like a hashtag or a quota or a metric that they have to hit just to appease stakeholders or get a certain number of things done. But as someone who has an ADA member in my family, I you really think about inclusivity from a different lens, because it's not a luxury, it's a necessity. Like, no, they need to be able to get in and out of the bathroom. No, they need to be able to eat unassisted. Like, and in thinking about the word inclusivity, not just with physically impaired individuals, but individuals who've had alternative backgrounds historically in this nation, I know we have so much further to go. But what are some ways that you think we have made strides, um, be it in a D&I umbrella or not, or just be it in an inclusivity bucket? You think we are making progress that people might not be aware of? Like we are becoming more thoughtful in ways of being inclusive.
Yeah, I think that, with more data, with more strong reporting, there's much more awareness. I think that there are definitely some companies that are, doing everything from like the trivial, right? Like maybe they're working with more vendors who've historically been excluded from their vendor list. And we're even seeing the transitions and changes at places like Target, right? Like Target is working with everyone from like Kalana Barfield to Finoel. And before, you only saw like the Jason Woos and the Isaac Mizrahis for Target. And you're seeing the HBCU collection roll out. I feel like that's one of the biggest and most prime examples. You look at places like Apple and Google. Like Google just announced their Tech Equity Fund Collective and have given over $1 million away to organizations that are supporting Black and Brown communities in their pursuit of training up the next generation of software engineers. So I think that there are definitely some sprinkles around the awareness and bigger conversations. We definitely saw the influx of DE&I professionals being hired at certain organizations. Now, one could argue that we're starting to also see a decline as well. But you're also seeing some companies start to hold true to, the accelerator programs that they have for Black and brown founders, like doubling down on those commitments, and pouring more money into like funds that are helping to support the fundraising needs of Black and brown founders. So, I think we could, probably take a look at the charts and the statistics and definitely see some flaws. But I think that if we lean in and focus on, well, what is working, who is being supported, what platforms do exist, I think the conversations are just out there in the open. And I think that, folks like yourself are holding, people and companies to tasks around these issues. And I think that, once you see how corporate America has like responded, that becomes just such a tremendous trend and opportunity to do some course correction. So I want to keep it on a positive note that like we are seeing some changes and opportunities. At least the consciousness has definitely increased. And, as, we've done, at the plug formally, we've done just a ton of reports on, the kind of growth. And even now, like my team and I, in our next venture, are really working with some awesome multinational companies, and working on understanding all across industries how Black and brown innovators are even using things like micro entrepreneurship to create new opportunities and income sources in the world. So, it's a question.
What's micro entrepreneurship?
So micro entrepreneurship is like, listen, maybe you're working your 9 to 5 and you still have somewhat of a side hustle. Maybe you make candles on the side and you sell those from a website, or you make t-shirts. Some folks do what they call, gig economy things. So maybe you're driving for Uber or Uber Eats, or, doing TaskRabbit opportunities and earning income from the side there. You are still an entrepreneur, even if you're holding down a full-time job and maybe you're only working on it a few hours, but you're using the internet, you're using technology to create new income sources for yourself and for your family.
Well, that definitely describes the experience of myself and a lot of individuals. And I will say in 2023, or just in general, there's always new terminology coming out. So it's like you could fall into a category and not even know that you fall there. Intuitively, micro entrepreneurship, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Minimal amount of time, trying to get your grind on. But let's take a couple steps back, because I would like to understand a bit more about you and how you wound up doing the umbrella of things that you do. So what made you interested in tech, and how did you get here?
Yeah, I always start the story with my grandfather hopped off of a bus in 1953 in Seattle, Washington, and he started working at Boeing as an aircraft technician. And that journey, being a Black man in the South who moved from Alabama to Detroit, there were opportunities there, obviously. And when he came back from the Korean War, went into a trade program. And once he finished, he got hired and left home. And that paved the way for, him, getting on his feet and really being able to create opportunities for myself and my cousin by buying us our first computers in the 90s, buying us CD-ROMs, my mom, like, being adamant about having a second phone line so that we could use the internet. She had to dial up back then. And so when I think about the access that I had at that age, it really just sparked my interest in technology. And I grew up in Seattle, Washington. And yes, there are Black people in Seattle, Washington. And so I grew up in Seattle, and, the proximity to the Microsofts, the Amazons of the world, technology was just sort of embedded in our culture in the city. And I had the fortunate opportunity to attend the Technology Access Foundation, which was started by a Black woman software engineer who turned a storefront in the hood into a computer programming training center. And there is where I got to learn programming languages, building of websites, terminology, interviewing skills. And then I worked at Microsoft. So, my story is not super atypical. But yeah, I mean, being able to work at Microsoft as, 14-year-old throughout, until I graduated from high school was such a privilege. And it was more privileged to have a bevy of mentors and bosses and leaders of all backgrounds, all backgrounds, racial, ethnic, and even sexual identity and gender identity, who just poured into me, and seeing that, I think continue to allow me to know that I can create something from nothing, and I can be a part of meaningful work that allows me to engage my mind. And so I've worked for the Ubers of the world, the Google Fibers of the world. I was creating businesses and online sort of businesses and communities and in college. And that's how I paid my rent in New York City, which was really expensive. And then I think all the dots for me just connected. You start to see who you are across your life. And, for me, the narratives that Black and brown folks were not in STEM or in tech, and every comparison was like, oh, you got to be the next Mark Zuckerberg or the next Steve Jobs. And it's like, well, I don't look like any of those people. I don't have the same background. I didn't have the same opportunities, and not from a victim mentality, but more of, what if it was Aisha Evans? What if it was Jewel Burke Solomon who sold her company to Amazon? That's who I want my nieces to know. That's who I want on the posters I want on their bedroom walls. And so, in launching the plug and even just covering stories for like Fast Company and The Root and Black Enterprise, like it was really just out of, as I spoke to earlier, intellectual curiosity. What are Black and brown folks doing in these spaces that are just really dope projects? And how do we get inspired by those things? Because I get inspired by being around other inspiring people and people who are just like tinkering and changing the world. And, it's like, I don't care so much about like celebrity fodder. Like, I want to learn about like that weirdo that's in his garage, making something to like pull plastic out of the ocean. Like that to me is so fascinating. And I wanted to see that from a lens of communities that like were like what I came from, Black and brown folks who poured into me and who really set the tone in our communities that allowed us to know that we could be what we wanted to be. And so that's really like, for me, technology just happens to be the medium. But for me, it was always about like, the fact that, I came from a community of innovators. And as Jerry Dorsey's granddaughter, he just helped me to realize that, I can do whatever it is that, I put my mind to.
I think that is so beautiful. And I really feel that way about representation. One of the hills that I'm willing to die on is that representation matters. Even if we look at it from a scientific lens, like there's something in your brain called the RAS, the reticular activating system. Basically, whatever you feed into your senses is what you're primed to see. They call it like the lime green pants phenomenon. Like you buy yourself some lime green pants and now you go outside and you feel like everyone's wearing them, when really it was the same statistical amount of people wearing them. It's just you're now aware of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So thinking about that and highlighting more individuals who may be reflective of ourselves inside of the tech space. That's why I personally spend so much time going to things like a Black Tech Week, or going to Afro Tech, or going to a mix of events that may be more catered to our community. But then I also spend a great deal of time going to things that are not catered to our community, because I believe I should be that diversity in the room as well. When it comes to people inside of tech, you dropped a couple of phenomenal names there, but do you feel like you have any particular inspirations inside of not just the tech space or the innovation space, but the intellectual curiosity space, as far as women or in anybody who inspires you? Like, yeah, that's my target. Like,
yeah, absolutely. Trish Maline Zizico has been a longtime mentor. She's the creator of the Technology Access Foundation, which is the programming school I came out of in high school. And for over 30 years, I mean, she's been leading in this work and really trying to support families and communities to have access to STEM education, and has done just phenomenal work in building up STEM leaders. I think a lot even about Dr. Desmond Patton. I believe he's at Princeton now. He's a professor at Princeton, but he was formerly at Columbia. And, he had this whole program with youth. They called it the Project Safe Lab. And it really helps like disadvantage, at risk, all those words, youth to kind of define for themselves like how they wanted technology to support them. And I just thought it was phenomenal work of like, a trained social worker to be working with youth and also major tech companies to really kind of like redefine like how do we build tech. I think those kind of people on a higher level, for sure. But I also feel like I'm really inspired by, content creators and people who are really, really great at sharing important information through the mediums that we have. I think about Aisha Selden, who is a licensed broker, who has taught financial literacy on so many different levels. I really get inspired by Nathan Barry, who shares updates on his net worth and how he and his family think about money and how they think about like retiring their parents so that they can have just more time with their parents. And I really get inspired by people who are really thoughtful about how they show up in the world and the lives that they live. And, it's not absent of like, yes, make money, like get smart about how you make money so that you can, do the things you want to do in the world. But I think anyone who's like writing or sharing or leading and, centering community and family, I think that those people really inspire me. And if you'd have asked me that same question, honestly, Alana, like 10 years ago, I probably would have told you like Elon Musk and, and all of these kind of folks who, are the faces of like these major things. And I think that there's a lot of great work that's been done by, folks who've been able to build multi-billion-dollar companies. But I think there's also a lot of great work that's been done by people who've just been able to hire people, just being able to give people an opportunity. If it's felt good that like, hey, at one point, I had 5 full-time employees, and that's small potatoes, like, right, like compared to, a major multinational. But it's like, yo, I really like paid a salary and healthcare benefits to 5 people at
Let's
one,
go.
and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on freelance journalists and researchers, particularly those of color or those of, different backgrounds. And that makes me feel really good about the fact that I created something from nothing and was able to play a very small role in someone else's wealth journey.
It's not small potatoes because entrepreneurship is truly one of the hardest journeys that someone can go on, not for of course they don't help, not for the systemic things in place that could make it slightly different depending on your background, but because of the mindset that is required. Becoming an entrepreneur, like Legacy, I did nursing for 13 years inside of a hospital system, and transitioning into entrepreneurship required a complete paradigm shift. Instead of clocking in for someone, you're now clocking in for yourself. So on days that you might not feel the best, on days that like there is no compromising, you wouldn't compromise for your boss because you have to be there. So you have to be there for yourself. And to get to the point where you're now responsible for more than just yourself, you're responsible for 5 other individuals, making sure that they eat. That's not small potatoes. That's not small potatoes. What would you say now, being on your entrepreneurship journey this long, what's something that you feel like individuals may not consider embarking on this journey that they really have to fortify in themselves if they want to have longevity inside of this space?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I think you need to know, like it's such a deeply, as you mentioned, such a deeply profound and shaping journey because you're faced every day with, can I do this? Why would I do this? Why would anybody want to do this? Because it is tough, especially on days where you can have like one day it is the best day of your life. You closed all the contracts. You had great customer reviews. You had amazing meetings, and the next day everything could be broken. You just found out next quarter's money is not going to look what it's supposed to look like. And that really can take its toll on you mentally and emotionally. And yet I think what you gain from betting on yourself is something someone can never take away from you, right? It's whether you decide to, you know, go back into a traditional work environment, at least you were able to kind of have that aspect of your life that you can point to, because you know how to lead a team now, you know how to hire, you know how to raise capital. You've stood in the face of rejection after rejection, and you were still able to find ways to bring money into your company. You face your limiting money beliefs, right? You go from, first I was being offered $5,000 checks, now I'm offered $25,000 checks, and now I'm at six-figure checks and above. And at some point, I'm going to get to $1 million. You're always challenging yourself, and and always having to face yourself, because it is just you. You have to go hunt and kill every single day. And I think doing that as a woman and as a Black woman can also look very different. And I have had to also be unapologetic about taking time for myself. Even just having a conversation with one of my team members today that, hey, here are the things that's happening in my personal health life. And here's where these next couple of weeks may be a bit of a challenge, but I want to let you know that, I am 100% committed to what we're building. And, it teaches you that level of transparency. And it toughens your skin a little bit. And I think as women and as Black women who also show up in spaces where a lot of times there's not as much consideration for our unique journeys, it gives you additional confidence that I belong in this room, right? Like, I belong in this room, even though traditionally you haven't seen someone that looks like me. And by the way, not only do I belong in this room, but there are other people who belong in this room that I'm also going to make sure that you know their names, and you're going to know my community names, and you're going to know where I came from. And you're not just going to ask me about what it's like to be Black in spaces, but you're going to ask me about what I'm building and why I'm super brilliant about what I'm building and how this is going to work and completely change the world. And so, there's days of confidence, and then there's days of doubt. And when you are able to push through that doubt, when you're able to really look at what your needs are, who you are, what you want to build, what your values are, you can also say, I don't have to do it like everyone else. I don't have to go to all the tech conferences. Maybe I don't have all the pedigree, the degrees, the Y Combinator. Maybe I didn't do, I didn't sit on similar stages. I did it in my own way. And maybe my mantra isn't move fast and break things. Maybe it is being meaningful and intentional. Maybe it's building for people who've never been considered. Maybe it is, I'm building my company around my life because I want to be accessible to my family and to my kids. Maybe it is, hey, I need to really brush up on my financial literacy because, if this doesn't come together, I can't start from scratch in terms of building my retirement fund. So I need to make sure that any new opportunities, I charge my worth because I'm investing back into the health and the welfare of my family. And so I think there's just a lot of things that you address, and you see yourself kind of face to face with what you're building. And it becomes much bigger than just you showing up and clicking a bunch of buttons every day. It is all about like how those buttons you're clicking impact your team, your community, your clients, your customers, all of those kinds of things.
Girl, you about to make me pass a collection plate through the screen. The funny thing about it is when I interview people and we just have free form conversation about their lives, about their interests and things, it usually shapes up to the topic at hand. And the topic today is about that tokenization. And I feel like as a Black woman, whether we want to sign up to that role or not, we get thrown into the D&I bucket. And that's why that part of the conversation came up. And then putting that to the side and finding your own sea legs and breaking out of that, like, no, I want to show up in other ways. And then there's days I'm showing up without any of that in mind because I'm just trying to navigate through this space for myself, trying to figure it out from day to day. I don't want to have to think about a whole bucket of other things that I'm checking boxes and ticking boxes for. And then you have the weight of your ancestors on you. Then you have the weight of whoever you're serving on you as well. And then that leads up to 10 million things exploded in my mind with what you just said, because it's like, okay, what is the original purpose that I came here for? I know for myself personally, my mission before I transition from this plane is to create pathways. I want to be able to identify problems that hinder people that look anything remotely similar to me and decrease the burden of effort that it takes to be able to have an organic, genuine experience inside of these spaces. Like entrepreneurship is hard enough for anyone, but we know that there's a few extra roadblocks that may present themselves depending on the vessel that you show up in. Recently, I was chatting with a few young ladies. I like to host activations, different events to expose people to tech. And even recently at another event that I went to, the same metric came up that in their youth, around middle school to high school, all the way to college, up to adulthood, women express a great interest in tech. We've seen an uptick in how many women are actually going for STEM degrees now. Even inside of our community, we're outpacing men 2 to 1 in like graduating with STEM degrees and going for the job. And even getting hired, despite the pay gap that is still there. That's a whole nother conversation for another day. But what they're even seeing with these metrics, while it may be upwards of 75% of girls that expressed interest in breaking into anything approaching tech, STEM, STEAM, only 0.4 actually converting over into these roles. And I've sort of tried to take the last year to really examine around that stat, like how could a breakdown that hard happen? How could we go from an interest level so high, because we have a high level of attention to detail, young ladies. We have the mental fortitude to sit and chomp through curriculum. We have the fortitude to start businesses. Like even some entrepreneurship stats, like we women, Black women start more businesses than almost any other demographic.
Right,
Just
right.
from our, So when I was looking at that breakdown of, okay, the drive is there, the interest is there, how do we arrive to less than 1% of us actually stepping into this space? And the most recent conversations I've been having with my peers are that some of them, we're at that interesting age now where you may or may not be having children and you may or may not be taking care of your parents, and opportunities may present themselves and you can't even capitalize or take advantage on the opportunities because you are being self-sacrificial and attending to other responsibilities in your life. It is often, not to say that all genders, all sexualities don't sacrifice for their families, but it is almost culturally or socially expected that when it comes to child care or child rearing or labor, domestic labor, anything of that sort, and this is across every country, first world, second world, third world, continents, we usually put our own self-interest to the side for the sake of family, which in some contexts could be considered noble, but that's a personal thing I've been grappling with lately. Like, what is nobility if if I can't pursue my dreams? If these young ladies, where 3 out of 4 of them want to enter into these spaces, and then it's like crumbs of how many actually go in. So my question to you, in stating that very long soliloquy that I just did,
Yeah.
have you personally had to grapple with that reality of the sort of the self-sacrificial nature? Despite all that you've achieved, do you feel like different pieces of your journey thus far may have looked different if you had gone for certain things or certain types of education or credentials, or do you feel as though that's not something that you personally had to experience?
I think these are big existential questions because I think that I think that we pose so much of this as like an opportunity cost. And I think that the challenge with that is sometimes, everyone's circumstances are unique. Folks' cultures are unique. Some people value family and community, right? From like my friends who are stay-at-home moms and wives, for them, their greatest accomplishments is investing in and pouring into their family. And that may look very different for myself and other friends and colleagues, right? In terms of what we believe are like reaching our fullest capacity through the work that we do in the world. I don't think any of those answers are wrong. I think the other thing that we come to the table with is our own unique background in economic situations. As you know, you talked about the ancestors earlier, and it's like, yeah, the ancestors don't play around, right? And you think about the fact of the matter is like I am, you know, a whatever X generation of people who were enslaved in this country, you know. And so when I think of, you know, the people that I come from who built America, you know, I'm American. I'm a Black American. And so I take to heart my opportunities because it is significant and important for me to build wealth and opportunity as a result of the challenges that each generation has had to face, from racial violence and discrimination to redlining to all of these kinds of things. And I try to make decisions based on data around how to mitigate some things. You can't, of course, outrun or outwork, you know, discrimination and economic robbery that has been centuries long. But when we even look at folks who do migrate to this country and the way in which parents are like, you got to be a lawyer, a doctor, an engineer, or an accountant. You have four options. And as tough as that may seem, you also see in other cultures by that next generation, everyone is out of poverty. And it's a lot of responsibility, but it sets us up for success. And so I don't have any right answers there, but I think so much about people choosing pathways according to their circumstances, according to their talents, and what opportunities are afforded. You know, I went to an Ivy League university. I was the first in my family to go to an Ivy League university. And I also have I pay for that in student loans, right? So in some instances, yes, I created a pathway for, you know, my legacy to be realized at those universities because I was able to open that door. But I think about, you know, my mom's generation. They came out of poverty. They were the first to go to college. They went to state schools, but they went to college. They graduated debt free. They purchased homes. They invest in their families. So I think so much about how our goal in our job a lot of times, at least for me, is to do better or to leverage what I was given that was passed down to me and leverage that in service of myself and my family as well as my community to the best extent possible. And when I think about young girls who start off in their interest in technology, things like that, there's so many factors. I think the KPOR Center does a great deal of work on researching the leaky pipelines, right? What happens when you don't have access to great schools? So you don't have AP classes in the sciences or the mathematics, you know, where's your interest going to be fostered? So that by the time you do get to a place where you can choose a major, well, maybe you're going to go for psychology, which is still important. But we also know that unless you have a ton of schooling, it's going to take a while for your salary to be, you know, where you would need it to be to completely transform your financial future. And so I think that that's also why, you know, when I look at the content creators who are sharing with young folks about getting government certifications, you know, how to structure your money, how to negotiate stock options, all of this is information that we did not have access to before. You
Right.
know, I wrote a book called Upper Hand, The Future of Work for the Rest of Us. And I talked about my journey, like leaving tens of thousands of dollars on the table because I didn't know how to negotiate. I didn't know what RSUs were. I didn't know what blackout periods were. And I didn't have people in my life that spoke about that regularly growing up. And so, you know, I think, and this is my soliloquy that's coming down as well, but you know, I think that there's so many variables. And I think the biggest thing, it goes back to that intellectual curiosity. That intellectual curiosity allows us to ask questions like this. It allows us to sit in, you know, salon, like, right? Like they did like in the early 1900s, you know, you sit and you salon. And I think that that's what we're doing on social media. We're saloning a little bit more because that's how we're sharing information. And then you can take that information and apply it to your own strategy, right? So maybe you do have your side hustle as a micro entrepreneur and you're working full time and you're leveraging those dollars and that network full time to create new opportunities. And then maybe you're taking certifications in order to continue to learn and to grow. And maybe you are helping fund some scholarship programs or what have you of organizations that are teaching young women more STEM opportunities. Maybe it's investing in Black Girls Code or Girls Who Code or In Tech Girls Camp and making sure these young ladies are matched with mentors. Or maybe you yourself, and that's the other thing too, is that we've gotten so into influencing people virtually. The reality is sometimes it's going out of your front door and going to a school and saying, hey, I want to volunteer, to teach X, Y, and Z, or I want to join the reading program because literacy, basic reading literacy is a challenge in this country. And no one's going to help solve these problems unless we take up that mantle and decide to walk that out in our communities. And so when I think about, well, this isn't like some big, Wizard of Oz, with this mighty, spectrum that can solve these problems. It literally is us. It's literally us saying, hey, okay, if I am in a school district where the literacy rate is very well below it should be, what can I do? Maybe I get with some friends and we decide to write a check, or maybe we decide to volunteer once a month or create a book drive so that kids can have their first chapter books. And especially books that with people on the cover that look like them, particularly in their communities. So I think that sometimes we get so distracted by the big sweeping changes that we don't look at the micro, right? Like the micro strategic planning of our lives, of our families, and of our communities, right? It's just like planning for kids. Kids are expensive. It costs $300,000 to raise a kid in this country. So, well, maybe, as we're planning our lives and we're thinking about, okay, education, financial stability, well, now maybe, when those things are factors, maybe then we can, find strong partnerships, strong communities, and then decide, okay, we're going to have a kid and this is what this is going to look like. Some of that is a lot of like, how do we have those conversations out loud? And I know we're in cancel culture, so there can be a lot of opinions that get critiqued, but also recognize people get to decide what they want to do. But how do we just expand the thinking models and create spaces for intellectual curiosity and say, oh, this is how, Alana, this is how you like to make your breakfast? Oh, I never tried that before. Maybe I'll try it and see if I like it. And if I do, maybe I'll do it again. Or that's gross to me, but I'm glad you like it, and I'm gonna keep doing what I'm doing over here. I just think that there has to be room and space for that.
Girl, literally just recently, so I moonlight as a debater elsewhere. One of my friends is a lawyer, so he always hosts mock debates for his little
wow, that's amazing.
And we literally just talked about that same stat. I know that Brookings stat you're talking about. From 0 to 18, it costs $308,000 some odd dollars. So about $20K a year just to have the bare minimums to raise a child. So yeah, I mean, even that, when we're talking about financial literacy, it's not just balancing a checkbook or structuring a legal entity like an LLC. It's like, okay, this extracurricular physical activity you engaging in might cost you a $300,000 bill. Are you ready to really talk about
I love the extracurricular. That is great.
and even that, you're so right about the volunteering. An event that we had at FMU 2 weeks ago, we were able to host a hackathon for some high school, college, and older individuals. And it was amazing. Of all the projects created, there were 8 viable teams in this hackathon. Shout out to Sydney Davis and Nick's Code. Thank you again. I will say thank you to the mountaintops for you, young lady. Come on, young Black woman with your trademark. And those children made amazing things. We were able to give out $4,000. Thank you, Microsoft, to the students, and mentorship. So shout out to each of the speakers who spoke, offered up mentorship, ongoing mentorship to those students for roles inside of tech. Humongous thank you to Whitney Lubin, Haitians in Tech. Oh my goodness. Just there's so many people wanting to do things and give back in that way. And we just haven't created the vehicles, so to speak. So hosting these events or even making community spaces where it's like, hey, I'm a mentor. Do you need mentation? Mentoring,
I
mentation.
like mentation. I have a feeling that we need to be using the word mentation.
Absolutely. But I love that. And I am also always looking for efficient ways that I can mentor as well, because it is a time requirement. And in your entrepreneurship journey, time is luxury. But if it's important to you, you make time for things that are important. So absolutely. Shout out to Lisa. She says she just bought your book. Yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you so much, Lisa.
I'm definitely going to pick it up again, because even in the space of this conversation, that's why I love having these conversations publicly. I tell my audience frequently, I don't know everything. I just happen to know some really dope people. So I'm having conversations that I otherwise would have been having on the phone off screen, but just in front of people, because I'm sure I don't know. There's somebody else out there who may not know. So you just dropped some words that I definitely have to go look up. I don't even know what an RSU is. I'm still learning. So I'm definitely going to go get your book first off.
Yes, yes, please. Please, and there's
Um,
so much that we just all have to share. That's what community is for, right? We learn in community, and that it's a safe space. Like we are not born with with every piece of knowledge. That's why we have resources. And like you said, you don't know everything. You surround yourself with people, and I'm like that too. I surround myself with people who are different from me, who know more than I do, who are going to recommend books, even down to like playlists. Like just even down to playlists. So I really love that, like that's part of the ethos and the way you live your life.
Absolutely. Well, as we wind down here, I sort of want to get into a future outlook journey. As we know, there's no one way to do any of this. Uh, but for people watching who may really resonate with your journey, or they're looking for ideas of things to do, what do you see yourself doing in this space? I know you're in the middle of restructuring your personal work journey right now, but as it pertains to work-life balance, even in family, self-care, and somehow balancing all that you do on a work front, it do you have different thoughts about that now as opposed to say 5 or 10 years ago?
Yeah, I make more time for it. I don't feel guilty. I used to feel really, really guilty about not working to myself to the bone, because that was the hustle culture that I was taught. And I went to school in New York City, so it was like that amplified, right? And so now I'm recognizing that my productivity is tied to my rest and my personal, emotional, spiritual health. It is, making more time for my family, spending time with my grandparents, doing the little things, like even just going to my friend's place to like watch her cat when she's out of town, things like that. I realize are so critical to the downtime sometimes we need to breathe, to reflect, to start again, especially, especially when we are building great things and we're in a lot of spaces that take a lot of our energy. We
Mm,
have to keep pouring back into ourselves. I think, especially as women, especially as Black women, especially during like some of the hardest times in our lives. And, I think when we think about the realities of police brutality and, just even watching the news, or reading the statistics about our kids and like the lack of opportunity. And sometimes you see discussions that are just really harmful and really dividing. And those can be very heavy. And so I think our ability to, at least for me, my ability to like delete my social apps from my phone once or twice a week, just so I can focus and be present, dive into a book, eat good food, go to the gym, which I've been trying to do more regularly, learn about my body, doing blood work. I'm sure you could appreciate this as a former nurse, like just learning about what energizes my body. How do I take better care of myself so that way for the things that I can prevent from a sickness standpoint, because grinding all the time, working, whether you're an entrepreneur or not, like it's not healthy, right?
right.
Working on our interpersonal communication skills, with our loved ones, with our significant others, the things that will really define having a loving and a peaceful life, and continuously being curious about how do I make this even better. And even when I'm doing really hard things and really hard work, how do I make this a better experience for myself and for everyone around me? And how do I approach my life with love and kindness and a sense of worth? Um, you know, from a leadership standpoint, but also just for yourself. Even when the rejection comes, even when you don't know what the next moves are, and even as you're reinventing yourself. And so I explore a lot of that too through, I have a new podcast that's called The Road to Reinvention. And I get to speak so much with entrepreneurs about this very same topic, because it is a journey, but that pouring back into yourself, I think, is key to the satisfaction and to the opportunity to sit and think and be still and to know, where you need to apply your purpose.
Absolutely. And where can we follow this podcast? Where are you?
Yes, wherever you listen to podcasts, it's called The Road to Reinvention, and also on YouTube, Road to Reinvention.
Absolutely. Let me go sign up for that right now.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
But no, this has been phenomenal. I think having these conversations, I know they're therapeutic for me. This is just me having therapy online for free. And it's important that we have conversations not just about how to achieve the financial success, that whatever we deem success in our head, but also talking about those things about tokenization, imposter syndrome. God, that could be another whole 4-hour conversation. Showing up for oneself and then disconnecting when it's expected that you feel like that need to hustle and grind and just be present 25/8. Like, so right. I'm grateful for your time today, Sherrell. I really, really am.
Thank you. Thank you for the discussion and for the space that you hold for so many of us and the work that you do. And I'm just grateful to be here.
Thank you so much. So y'all follow Sherrell on everything. This will be available on YouTube, and it'll be available on my LinkedIn, and in a few weeks on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thank you, Sherrell. I'm following your journey. I love every single thing that you're doing. I really do think that you show up authentically as yourself everywhere. And I'm gonna run into you in these tech streets out here.
Yes, absolutely. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining as well.
Have a great day. There we go.